So we'll be walking through some of the common enrollment findings that can come up during an annual audit or program review. So avoiding common enrollment audit findings. Common findings overall, this is going to be findings that come up most often in an audit or a program review, not just specific to enrollment reporting. And those are as follows. The return to Title IV, so calculation issues, timing of calculation issues, that can come up, pretty common. Student credit balance deficiencies as well, verification violations, entrance and exit counseling deficiencies, and then of course enrollment reporting. That's one of the top 5 common ones that come up in audit. Our focus, of course, today will be about what's related really to data flowing from your school to Clearinghouse, which is enrollment reporting. So we broke down into a few different categories. And for trending topics that we work through in the Audit Resource Center when school inquiries come in during or after a financial aid audit, these are the big ticket items that we kind of can bucket them into. So graduated status reporting, and then another enrollment status code reporting of withdrawn. So those 2 enrollment status codes, G and W. And then loosely speaking, just school policy and procedure gaps, and then incorrect data. So data discrepancies where you expect to see one particular thing for a student's enrollment record for a data point, but something else is there. First one we're going to get into is going to be graduated enrollment status reporting. And just to kind of give some context about this, it's the G enrollment status code. And the way that the Department of Education, or NSLDS, National Student Loan Data System, defines this is that the student has completed a program. And a program for enrollment reporting to Clearinghouse, which aligns with what the National Student Loan Data System defines as a unique program, it would generally be a major course of study for the student for their degree track, and it's that they completed that program. So we are kind of talking in a way about program level reporting data. Not necessarily is the student always going to be graduated overall from your school. They may be continuing on in an additional program and be continuously enrolled and in an active status at the campus level, but along the way, maybe they did complete a program. Essentially, reporting of graduated statuses for compliance is that the graduated status does show on the program level for that completed program. And then if the student happens to have completed all their current programs for the current term that was their last date of attendance, and they're not coming back to your school, then graduated at the campus level would be in order for that. So what is the federal guidance? What are the requirements for reporting graduated statuses? And as simple as it sounds, and when we get into actual live data and student behavior and timing of degree audits for schools to actually assess degree awards, all of those different things definitely factor in to make this somewhat challenging at certain times or for certain situations. In general, the expectation from the department is to certify a graduated status when a student essentially completes their program. So this is going to be regardless of whether or not that student continued on at your school. And also, even if the student completes a program later than their last term of enrollment. So there are a lot of outlier situations that can happen where student's last date of attendance is May 5th, 2020, but they didn't tie up a loose end and they didn't have to re-enroll, but maybe you're awarding a degree sometime after their last date of attendance. So those things can happen. So there may be situations where you would be reporting a status change of graduated to Clearinghouse sometime well after the student's last date of attendance. So graduated enrollment status reporting for the federal regulations, specifically the 150% direct loan limit regulations, they do require that schools certify a graduated status for completed programs. This is actually going to pertain to the portion of your population that attend your school or are alumni of your school of late in the last 5 years or so who have a direct subsidized loan. it will be somewhat impactful to them and critical to those particular students that if they do complete their program and it was a program you were reporting to Clearinghouse, that you subsequently are reporting a graduated status if the student has ceased enrollment in that program and the reason they're no longer in it is because they completed it. So there are a number of ways you can actually report enrollment information to Clearinghouse. And there are some ways that may prove to be a better fit for your school than other ways. And it really just depends on a number of things. But big ones would be, what population are we talking about? Is it a large population at your school? Is it a smaller school? How many degree awards are you doing? When are you doing them? When are you feasibly able to assess degrees? So the timing of everything is a really important thing that we like to factor in and be thoughtful about when we're discussing any challenges a school may be experiencing when it comes to reporting graduated statuses. Essentially, these are the different ways that you can report graduated statuses. One of them is going to be scheduled enrollment files. That would be the schedule that you have set up for enrollment reporting with Clearinghouse, and you could incorporate enrollment status changes that are changes to graduated the way you would report any other status change, like an increase in status, half-time to full-time, full-time less than half-time, withdrawn statuses. So you can incorporate them that way at the campus and or program level, wherever it fit or appropriate for that student. And then there is an enrollment file type that is dedicated to reporting separation statuses, and that's called graduates only. But it's not just graduates. A lot of schools leverage it to report if they're a larger school and they do not take attendance and they have a volume of unofficial withdrawals. Sometimes schools will have a graduates only enrollment file on their enrollment reporting schedule to account for those student status changes as well. But that is the one other batch option to report graduated statuses to complete this compliance need. So we got enrollment files, graduates only files, and then there are two manual individual record update options. One of them is the online update feature on the Clearinghouse site. It is under student lookup when you log into our secure site. So that would be a low volume. You wouldn't want to dedicate your valuable time to reporting hundreds of those that way, but that is an option for the lower volume of records that you may be wanting to report a status change to graduated. And then if your institution sends degree verify files to us, some background on those, it's a totally separate service line for the Clearinghouse. It's free service to schools. And that's where you would send us degree files. And that way the third-party requesters, even students themselves, so legitimate third-party entities that are in need of confirming, yes, the student earned the credential they said they did at your school, or were previously enrolled at your school the time they said they were, either one of those, that would be the service that I'm referring to. And so for the Degree Verify service, there is this optional function that some schools do participate in. It is called G from Degree. In other words, graduated statuses from degree files is really what that means. The G from Degree feature, it will generate graduated enrollment statuses on a graduate's file that Clearinghouse generates just from your degree records alone. So anywhere possible where we can confidently generate the graduated statuses for your students from your degree file, we're going to reflect that for you on the enrollment system. And so part of that process is, because there are so many data points for each student record that you're reporting for the 150% limit, so you're reporting campus level enrollment and also program level enrollment, a lot of data points. For that reason, if it's 99% or lower in confidence to generate a graduated status, in other words, maybe the student is continuing on in another program already. So we couldn't simply just recertify the status that we have because we would need that confirmation from the institution. For those students, there is a list on our website. If you participate in G from Degree, that function, that will display the students that require attention, meaning that from the degree record you sent us for that student, we weren't able to generate a graduated status just from that degree record. and that record needs your attention, where should this graduated status go? Is it just on one program? Is it on two programs? Should it be at the campus level as well? All those types of questions. And so that's another individual student record update option. Of these four different options, when we're talking about what are the best solutions to report that enrollment status change to graduated, if you are faced with lots of manual updates for G statuses and things like that. And that really would be these two options, the scheduled enrollment files and graduates only. So any opportunity to capitalize on a batch option like the graduates only file layout, file type, or a regular scheduled enrollment file, those are the best choices to avoid the heavy lift if you're working with a volume of students. Switching gears to, this is another enrollment status code that comes up most often in an audit, and that is withdrawn status reporting. It's generally a separation status reporting or a drop below halftime. When a student's decreasing in status to less than halftime, those are the ones that, in my experience at least, auditors are typically reviewing. They're focusing a lot on those because those in general for a Title IV student are the most impactful as far as NSLDS needing that type of update and needing it timely so that they can notify a student of repayment or grace period or remove a deferment and do subsidy calculations for the direct subsidized loans. So yeah, graduated statuses and withdrawn statuses are generally a focus for auditors. So why is it so challenging to report withdrawn statuses? And really we're just saying, is the student here anymore? Or do we consider them withdrawn and that they are no longer an active student with the school? In other words, they're not graduated, they're not on a leave of absence, and they're not continuing on at the school. And so that usually is going to mean that the student status change is to withdrawn. And so one of the biggest problems is just the nature of withdrawn, of the circumstances that can be going on. It could be an official withdrawal. If your school's not mandated to take attendance, having all the mechanisms in place that can be pinged so that you can be alerted and learn as swiftly as you're able that a student is now considered withdrawn, faculty or an instructor having to report whether or not a student was in attendance, and those sorts of things, all those things factor in, which result in there being some challenges sometimes with assessing timely that a student has withdrawn and reporting it as such, that with that status change. So certain withdrawn statuses assessed by the school, they can occur, sometimes it's a retroactive scenario. So you've already reported that the student is continuing on for the current term, but then later you receive more updated, better information that the student actually was an unofficial withdrawal from the prior term. So then managing that and what does that look like to make sure that the data gets updated to your satisfaction, to make sure that it accurately reflects the documentation that you have demonstrating what actually happened and when for that student's withdrawn status. So really a lot going on with withdrawn statuses for sure. So a best practice, a lot of things that have to do with the withdrawn status reporting really is, the heart of it is, and the root of it is with the school. Sometimes it's maybe one particular department has awareness about the enrollment status change to withdrawn, but for whatever reason, that doesn't make its way into the enrollment reporting side of it or the student information system side of it. And so just, consulting school policy and also reviewing or creating best practices about when exactly do we consider a student withdrawn under XYZ variety of circumstances. And more specifically, if it's a retroactive withdrawal scenario, how exactly does financial aid address those for Title IV students or for return calculations? Having that kind of agreement within the school can really promote consistent reporting to clearinghouse, and then during audit time, it can make it clear that there aren't any inconsistencies between the different systems and the paperwork, and that everything really lines up and really can help avoid those types of audit issues. So if you do find your institution in a situation where you've already reported first file for the current term's enrollment to Clearinghouse, but you are assessing a lot of withdrawn students from the prior term and you're experiencing some challenges in figuring out how to account for that, that would definitely be a thing that we would love to work on with you to review with you more closely. And so you can always reach out to us with that type of a scenario. And student examples really help us too. So this is going to be very similar to graduated status reporting, the different ways that you can report the separation status to us of withdrawn. And if we're talking about a volume, so not in the tens, but we're getting up to 100 and beyond, 50s even, anything that is beyond your threshold of acceptable time allotted for updating records manually, anything beyond that, then we would want to see, is there opportunity to work this into a batch solution? And so for those, yeah, it's going to be these scheduled enrollment files or leveraging that graduates only file. That's another file type that you can use to report the other separation status of withdrawn. So school policy and procedures, so basically daily work. Essentially, there are lots of influencers that really shape school policy, and school policy may not change all that much. And so sometimes things can become stale. The compliance reporting process and just expectations for Title IV from schools has really just evolved over the last several years, in particular, the last 2 years. And so your procedures, the daily work, and then the school policy, and then how all of that factors in with our day-to-day work and the different things that impact or affect enrollment for student aid compliance reporting. When all these big ticket items align, it really can reflect in the audits and just in general for the compliance reporting piece of your enrollment reporting to really yield like consistent enrollment reporting. Switching gears a little bit, federal reporting, the National Student Loan Data System, SSCR, is Student Status Confirmation Report. There are a number of timeliness expectations throughout the process. And so one of our dedicated tasks for the enrollment reporting service that we have is that we want to help ensure that we're meeting all of those timeliness expectations, roster distribution to roster distribution. And when we're talking about the roster distribution, what I mean by that is it's the list of students that NSLDS creates that they are asking for Title IV for your school. And we have that distribution set up monthly. So we receive roughly 12 a year for your institution. One of the expectations is once we get the roster, there is a timeliness expectation to respond to the whole roster. So we respond, and that has to be within 15 days. And then correcting roster errors. So NSLDS, they have error code logic too, like most systems. And so if there is an error presented, we're going to send an email to certain role types at your school, and also information in the content of that email that's indicating like where to go to see the errors. And that would be on the Clearinghouse secure site. And there's a platform on there so you can update error records that way. And there's some resources on that site too. Another expectation is to certify enrollment for all requested Title IV students. So that's something that's built into the Clearinghouse logic for responding to the SSCR roster distribution that Clearinghouse receives on your school's behalf from NSLDS. When NSLDS requests information on student A, we respond to student A. So that in and of itself is an expectation. And then certified program enrollment. This one can be a little confusing. Basically, the government has an expectation that you are consistently certifying program level enrollment for students who are enrolled in programs. So there isn't a requirement for Title IV students to be in a program. That's not a requirement at all. The requirement is that if they are in a program, that you're reporting it and that you're reporting it consistently. And then report accurate and complete enrollment for Title IV. That's a real broad stroke, kind of overarching umbrella expectation, but that is one of the expectations. So avoiding gaps, communication, and intelligibility. So, and this isn't inclusive list, obviously, but financial aid, registrar, school senior administrators, federal, state, local mandates, these are all potentially the entities that can influence school policy and then also the day-to-day procedures. So when there can be alignment and agreement to meet everyone's demands across the board for all the different key anchor departments within a school, and then the school as a whole, and then the school as part of a larger district or as a part of a larger accreditation group or state, all those things that can also help to support the consistent compliant enrollment reporting piece of it to avoid those audit issues and avoid those audit findings. And these are just small ticket items that can go amiss, and they may not even be something that your school experiences. But if this were something your school experienced, it can be something that we can help in identifying that may come up in an audit. And so one of the things that can come up is that an auditor will review a test sample student in NSLDS, or someone at the school provides them screenshots from NSLDS for the test sample of students, and they'll find that there isn't any enrollment information for a student. And then if we're, given the opportunity to work with that school, if the school reaches out to us and we try to really dig in to figure out, well, where is this record? We need to find this record. Sometimes what we find is that the student was a reject detail record. And the reject detail record deserve more attention than I think we speak to enough. So we can't talk about this enough, in my opinion, because these records can go amiss. And so if you have an access to the clearinghouse site, the clearinghouse secure site, you log in, you click on student reporting and then enrollment reporting and then transmission history. And then this is going to be the enrollment files that clearinghouse has processed for your school. And each time we process an enrollment file, I would encourage one or a few people that have this as part of their process after they get an email that we process their file. They would log into our site and then go and look at this detail link. The detail link is really critical because we're going to list records there that were rejected from your enrollment file. And just the fact that there are rejected records on there, just if there might not be any, but if there are, you wouldn't necessarily want to jump to the conclusion that that means you have a huge compliance issue. It just means that these records are rejected records, and then it's really to be determined whether or not there's an issue. The critical ones to review and vet the information, like the social security number, the student information, it's the name, date of birth, is all that what our paperwork says it is. The reason why you want to check those out, it's really for your loan students and your Title IV students. So whether they have a private loan or they have a direct loan or they have a Pell Grant or whatever it is, if they're on this reject detail list in the clearinghouse site, we don't want them to just sit there. We want to get those records cleaned up so that they can be in our active system, so that their information has opportunity to properly flow to loan servicers, and also, especially for federal financial aid audits, we want to be able to be sure that it can flow to NSLDS. If you haven't checked this out on our secure site and you have access and that's part of something that you do, I would log in and check it out. And then if you have questions, contact our Audit Resource Center. That's something we'd like to look at with you. Another one, and this can come up in audit, the way that it would present itself in audit, that we're talking about NSLDS SSCR errors. These are the errors that come from the roster distribution with the government, with NSLDS. So the way that this can be presented in an audit is usually two ways. One is that there, again, isn't any enrollment information for the student in NSLDS, and then it begs the question, well, why? And then the other thing that can come up with SSCR errors is that the auditor is seeking to confirm yes or no, did the school correct errors timely and consistently? Having a one-off or a certain error code that is problematic for a brief period of time, that can happen. And I think we can provide support to explain that for those more rare occurrences. But in general, month to month, if there are errors, are they being corrected? Over half of the schools that are clearinghouse schools, they don't experience NSLDS SSCR errors, which is great. But if you do experience SSCR errors, it doesn't necessarily speak at all to the integrity of your data. It's not usually about that. It's more rare if it is about that. But errors can occur. It doesn't mean it's bad data. But we do have lots of resources on that webpage, and we have some dedicated tutorials on Clearinghouse Academy that speak to what are these SSCR errors. And we also have a dedicated email address to sscerrors@studentclearinghouse.org that can help support. If you've never looked at these errors and you happen to have some, contact us. I guarantee there's somebody here that is familiar and can be, helpful to you and maybe hopefully save you some time with those errors. When we're looking at this page, and again, we log into the secure site, click on student reporting and enrollment reporting. And this time, to get to this page, instead of clicking on transmission history, because that's your enrollment reporting to Clearinghouse, you'd click on NSLDS reporting. So that's data that's leaving Clearinghouse and going to NSLDS on the roster process. So when you're looking at this page, there's an originator column, and if it says NSLDS, that is the roster process. That is the compliance in the regulations referenced required process, the roster process. If you see originator CH, that actually is a supplement to the compliance process. So it's not the compliance process, it is merely a supplement. And basically what that is it's a clearinghouse homegrown function. It's a FERPA compliant and federal student aid approved function to actually report new enrollment data for students from your school to NSLDS who were not requested currently by NSLDS, but were requested in the past. In other words, students who used to be requested by NSLDS in the past 10 years, but they just aren't requested anymore. And that could be due to matriculation. Maybe they separated from the school and then re-enrolled months later. It could be a number of things, but it usually has to do with student movement. It's really meant to alert NSLDS that, hey, there's new enrollment information for this student, and you used to ask for this student. Do you want this new information? And then NSLDS can disregard it or can accept it. So and that will add them back to your roster. So essentially that's what that process does. But something that you'll see on this page, if you look in the column where the header is NSC due date, there is not a due date ever on the CH originator row. Even if you were to experience errors, we strongly recommend definitely take action on those if you are able, and at least monitor them. But if you can take action, take action. But because it's a supplement to the process and it's not part of the regulations, there isn't going to be a timeliness date for those errors because it really and truly is meant to augment the compliance process. It is not the compliance process. So I hope that that distinguishes between the roster process that has to do with Title IV, that has to do with compliance reporting for Title IV, that has to do with audits. That's going to be limited to the NSLDS originator row. If you do experience any SSCR errors for the current roster, we would display a clearinghouse due date or NSC due date. And so ideally you'd correct those errors by that due date, and then we send the error response out within the timeliness requirement, which happens to be 10 days. And we send that to NSLDS, to the government. One silver lining I want to be sure to mention, if you happen to have had SSCR errors in the past and you're unsure, or you know for a fact that no one has ever addressed those, you do not want to go back in time and address old errors. The reason why is it can cause more errors. If you have a concern about an error from an old report, before taking any action and taking up your valuable time to take action like that, shoot us an email, give us a call so we can take a look at what you're looking at. And so, we can, hopefully participate and be part of the conversation about, is this a record to take action on or is this not? So in general, you're just going to want to focus on the current row. So for this example screenshot, we've got, it's going to be this row that's highlighted. That would be the current row. If there were errors, you would only want to address those. You wouldn't want to go back and address the row below it that's an NSLDS row. So if you have SSCR error concerns or questions, or how do I address this error and the online resources, I have a question that's outside of those, that sort of thing, you can always contact us. The email address is sscrerrors@studentclearinghouse.org. And also we have audit resource at studentclearinghouse.org. Incorrect data. Some background on the clearinghouse's enrollment reporting process. If you do send data to the clearinghouse, or you are one that would receive notice or note from us about, there's an error resolution report on the web to view and to correct the errors and review the warnings and take action on those where you see fit, and then send the data back to us. That error code logic that you're seeing is really compliance driven. The heavy influencer on the campus and program level and all the data points, really, logic behind those error codes that you're seeing and the warning codes, it's really built with compliance in mind. The idea is that on the front end, when we get your enrollment data, let's work through any consistency issues or missing programs, that sort of thing, and really do a thorough review and edit on that, and so that your school can make changes as you see fit on that data before it's available to loan servicers and to the NSLDS. So that's really what all that logic is that you're seeing. And as the years have gone by, with program level reporting being part of the process, the error code logic, it is more involved and layered because there are those additional NSLDS data points of the program level detail. So if we get beyond that logic, the data errors, they can still occur. And so they can be large scale or small scale. So the things that we've seen come up in audit, it's going to be one of two buckets. It's either going to be a systemic, large scale issue, whole program of students, whole term of students, whole population of students. Those sort of widespread, this affected everybody because this was related to a programming issue, or even just inconsistencies in data input into the SIS. It could be that. So those things, and we don't come across that too much, but that is one of the things. And that's going to be a more large, widespread, larger scope kind of a thing that can come up in audit. And then the other one is more benign. It's just like a one-off. It's not that 1,000 records were affected. It's that this one record was affected. And that's really going to be like the data entry issues. So clerical issues, that sort of thing. Just like the one-offs. It's not really system related. So avoiding audit findings for incorrect data, it's going to be really tough to manage in a proactive way. Lots of times it can be reactive. And so sometimes we don't know there's an issue until an auditor tells us there's an issue. So trying to find ways to be more proactive and move away from being reactive where issues come up. That's just the nature of data and reporting. And so issues come up, and finding or identifying those issues between audit times, that's the ideal time, right? Not when the auditor's telling us there's a problem. It's when we identify it ourselves, there's an issue, and then make moves for corrective action and changes to procedural changes for moving forward, things like that. And then that can help on the back end when an auditor is on site. You're helping to avoid those issues. So how exactly do we do all that? So one of the best ways is just conducting a very casual, small subset of student review. Unlike an auditor, the auditor in a way has a disadvantage because they are pulling a random test sample. You can do whatever you like when you review data, your own data. So I would purposefully poll students in different scenarios. And we're talking not 100, we're talking 10. Poll a few students that graduated from multiple programs, a few students that were leave of absence. We have a slide later that will kind of list out some different scenarios that are students that you may want to look at. And the students that are going to be of interest for this internal audit for federal aid, only Title IV students. Those are the only ones, because those are the only ones subject to compliance reporting. In other words, subject to data being for that student going out to NSLDS. And so once we pulled our cherry-picked test sample within our own school, where am I looking at information? For the program level information that you're sending to Clearinghouse, you'll want to check that against your published course catalog or pamphlet or like document that is published, that's widely available to students and faculty and everyone. You'll want to review it against that. And then also, if your school is dispersing or drawing down or making updates in common origination and disbursement, there are areas in there where your institution would be entering in program enrollment information, including things like the SIP code, the SIP year, the program length, the measurement, all of those things. So those different data points that also you send to Clearinghouse. So checking the particular subset of students in there. Also your student information system, of course, any sort of financial aid documentation for that student that an auditor would look at. So return related paperwork, return R2T4, return to Title IV related paperwork. And then in the Clearinghouse site, you can look at their enrollment history under student lookup, and also what did Clearinghouse send out to NSLDS for that student. You can look at that. And then when you're in the NSLDS site, you want to, so basically you're just tracking the flow of information for this student and assessing, is it consistent? So it's not so much that data is wrong, it's more so that data is inconsistent, and then auditors say, well, it can't be both. Like a withdrawn status effective May 5th, 2020, and one system, and then in paperwork at the school it says May 4th. It's only one day, but an auditor may say, well, it can't be both. It has to be just one day. So what day is it? So it's more about consistency across all systems and agreement than it is about data being wrong. Because one could argue data is right? So it's more so that. And so when you're in the NSLDS site, there are two different pages on the NSLDS site that you can look at information that an auditor typically looks at. One of those is called enrollment detail, and the other one is called program enrollment detail. So essentially, it's just enrollment detail is going to show the campus level information that NSLDS has accepted for that student, and then program enrollment is going to show the program enrollment. In NSLDS, if you were to log in there, or one of your colleagues who has access, there is one key piece to this. When you log in there, you're going to see that there are a bunch of drop-down menu options in NSLDS to display different enrollment certifications in their table of enrollment received for a student. What you're going to want to do there is you're going to want to select the option to display all active and inactive. And the reason why is that's going to give you the most complete picture of all the instances NSLDS accepted information for a student. So that's a piece that can go amiss when auditors are they're passing judgment. That's what they're doing. They're passing judgment on the test sample. They are testing that sample of students during that audit. And so if the auditor isn't looking at the full picture of the student's record to help them make that assessment, then it's already kind of off to a bad start, because the last thing that anybody wants to see for anybody is getting an audit finding that the auditor really wouldn't have issued and that the school wouldn't have received. So it's really that, it's mitigating that particular risk. And so for that informal, casual review of your small test sample of students that you would do in between audit times, so maybe you do it like every quarter or every month. It really just depends on what you think is best for your school, but regardless, it would be in between audits. It wouldn't be when the auditor's there. Students that you cherry pick for this, again, they're just Title IV students, but students in these different situations would be good. So first-time freshman, first-time borrower, a student that was a Title IV student and was an unofficial withdrawal or had a retroactive withdrawal, students that graduated at the end of different academic terms during your academic calendar, approved leave of absence. There are stipulations with the government about when you can and cannot report the A enrollment status code for a Title IV student. So if you have a Title IV student that you've reported in the A status, pulling one of those into your test sample to review. And then federal aid dispersed not by your school, but a prior school. And to go back to the slide that talked about SSCR errors, there's that CH row as the originator of CH. That's the ads process. The ads process is to help NSLDS and to help the schools with that scenario where aid wasn't dispersed by your school, but the student still has outstanding aid, and then they attend your school. For that matriculated student scenario where you're not dispersing aid, so there isn't a reason for NSLDS necessarily to be pinged to request that student. That's where helping to fill that part of the gap by alerting NSLDS to students that are in that situation. So checking out one of those. And then if you do have students that attend and are on Pell, looking at those students and tracking their enrollment, again, in these various systems is always good. If you have a concern or a surprise, that's what we want to find is, are you seeing surprises in the data? And if not, then is everything good and as expected, or are there any questions or concerns? So really answering those kinds of questions. So if you have a question, you can always just reach out to us. And again, it would be, in between audit times. If you have a federal aid audit or program review type of question or concern that relates to the enrollment reporting piece, you can always reach out to our Audit Resource Center. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us.